The video you're about to watch is part of a tutorial series that involves the development of an iOS game app. Now, the app is actually based on a popular game that's known as Rock, Paper, and Scissors. In previous parts of this tutorial, we had focused. Currently we've already completed four parts, and this will be the fifth part. And the first part, right, focused on some kind of introduction to the game where we discussed what the game was all about. So if you really want to understand the game, you probably want to start with part one. And then the second part actually discussed the general structure of the game. And in that part, I discussed the specific design or architectural, structure of the game that we're designing, and we said it was based on the MVC design pattern or MVC app architecture, which incorporates model, kind of breaks the app into four large buckets. And one of those is the model, which is the part of the app, where you develop the data model and the logic of the game. And then the second part is the view, which is where you develop the user interface and then create the back end that would eventually tie back to your view controller. And then the third part of it is the controller, which is where you connect the model and the view, parts of the model and the view, so that at the end of the day, you will realize a simple but very functional app using the design philosophy that we mentioned, which is the MVC, model, view, controller, design pattern. So that said, I also want to mention that the particular content we are going to be discussing right here, is based on material that was gleaned from the Develop in Swift Exploration course, which is an Apple starter, some kind of Apple starter iOS application development course. And the course book, on which this is based, is actually currently available for download on the Apple Books. So you might consider looking that up. So that's done. I want to now focus on this video. Now, like I mentioned, we've had four parts before, and right now we are working on the fifth part. The third and fourth part of the video, the third and fourth part, actually, the third part focused on models, which is the game model and logic. The second part, which is the fourth part, focused on the view, where we develop the user interface, and this is the controller, where we are trying to tie together what you have going on in the model and the view. So I'm going to go to Xcode and begin to show us what we've done, and then proceed from there. So this is our code. Let me open it up again. And so I'd like you to first of all look at main, look at the file that I clicked here. This is the user interface, right? Sign and game states, right? Here we talk about the various signs that each of the players are going to throw up. And then this is where we have the game states. Now, at any one time, any point in the game, there are going to be one of four states. The app is going to be in a start state, or it will be in a win state, or a lose state, or a draw state. So sign and game state is where we essentially put together the data model and logic. And then we came to main, and that's where we essentially focused on the user interface. And then we created a tie back. So if I highlight this, you can see every part of it is connected to something on this side. So that's what we have done. So the next phase, which is the controller phase, is where we're going to be focusing right now, where we're essentially going to go to view controller. This is where we're going to do most of our coding. And essentially what we're going to be doing here is tying together what we have from the model to what we have in the view. All of that will happen in the view controller. So how we're going to start is we're going to focus on updating the user interface, because like I mentioned, at any one time this app is going to be in any one of 4 states. So what happens if I'm in a start state and all of a sudden the game starts, and then the 2 players begin to play and then somebody wins, right? The state of the app has changed. We need to be able to, develop, parts of the code here that would help us tie what's happening in the main excuse me, what's happening here in the main, which is the view, and what's happening here, and all of that we're going to do in the view controller. So how we're going to do is we're going to actually start by creating a function that is called, would call that function update the UI, which is quite descriptive of what we are trying to do. And we want to do that right here in this method. So I'm going to log in here and I will say from update UI. I'm going to open state, game state, and I open. So I have this. So essentially what you see happening here is we've created a state, right? Or essentially we've added a parameter that we would call state, right? And we've actually made it a type, make it of a type game state. Remember, the game state is what we have from here, and that's why we're mapping this state. So essentially what we are trying to do is to choose one of these states, right? That's what we are doing here, and that's why we've mapped this this way. So because it's an enum, all it does is, and of course you have those 4 cases, which is start, win, lose, or draw. So what this function will do is simply pass the state, what it picks up the state from here, passes that state into the executable, which is what we're going to type in here right now, and then the method would execute and react appropriately as appropriate. And for the specific case of enums, one way to actually deal with enums, because it represents several cases, a switch statement is actually a very good way to deal with an enum, because it accounts for all the cases within an enum. You can use a switch statement to do that. It provides alternatives. It's actually a very good alternative to the if statement, and particularly very useful when you're responding to multiple potential states. So we're going to go ahead and type the switch statement here, switch, and then we create our state, which we have already created before, open and close. And then we want to type in our various cases. The first case is start, and you can see start here. Sorry, let me go back some space. Then the next will be let's go back, case dot win colon case dot lose colon, and then we have to deal with draw, case dot draw, and then we have this. So that's what we have at this point, and you notice it's giving us all of these errors, and you can see what it's saying. Case label is a switch must have at least one executable statement. So you ignore this error. What we want to do right now is actually to include some kind of executable statement in here. So one of the things is your executable statement could be a whole lot of things, but in this particular case we actually want to set it to a string literal. Ordinarily it could be anything, or at the end of the day you might just want to be able to you know it might just be some kind of output from your game state. But now we're just going to use a string literal that just tells us exactly what's happening within the particular case. So I'm going to map status label, and then dot text, and I would say rock, paper, scissors, because that's what essentially is happening at the start, right? That's what you ask at the start. You're asking, is it a rock, is it paper, or is it scissors, right? When there is a win, you're going to do the same thing. Status label and dot text equals to you win. And we can say, or you win or you won, whichever one makes sense to you. And then we come to the lose status. What status label are we gonna apply? Text, we will say you lose. Exclamation mark. And then for the draw, what status label do we use? Status label dot text, which is equals to, we say it's a tie. So let me see, the error should go away at this point. Have at least one executable. Yeah, so we've been able to include the executable statement, right? And that's how if this happens, this happens, if this happens, this happens, if this happens. So anytime there is a change in state, right, we can go from one state to the other where something is executed. And like I mentioned, it doesn't have to be a string literal. It could be any other thing that you want to execute when we get into the start, or we get into win, or we get into lose, or we get, so all of that change happens here. So in this case, what we are just doing is we are drawing from here, and then we are reflecting whatever it is in the view. So the other thing we can do is to set or change the background color, right, of the view depending on the current state. So if we have a particular view, if say we have a start, right, all of a sudden we can change from one thing to the other, from one color to the other. So same thing is still going to be, so first of all it shows this, and then the next thing we want it to do is to change the color. So we say view dot background, right, equals to that will be UI color, because UI color is the Swift type that actually represents color. So we say UI color, right, and we choose the color. Here we're using system green. That's a particular color type, or let's say system gray, right? So we want to do the same thing for command copy, We want to do the same thing for win, but we're going to change the color. So Command V, and make sure you're tracking this because you don't want to forget to make the change. So essentially we are doing it for each of the cases, but then we're using different colors. So for the second one, we're going to use green, the green color. For the third one, we're going to use red, and for the fourth, which is the draw, so if there's a draw, we want our screen to turn yellow. So that's what we've been able to do. So in this part, all we've done is we have made it possible for whenever there's a change in state, the background color of the view, the main view, would change, and that would depend on the current state, if it's start, win, lose, or draw. So that's all we've captured here. And then the next thing we want to do is to provide, remember, two people are playing, or two entities are playing. It's the human who has the app and is punching on their phone, and the computer playing against the human. So we want to be able to give the human some kind of sense, right, that they are playing against the computer. And how we want to do that is to make a robot emoji appear on the app label when the game starts. So to do that, what we're going to do is we are literally going to set some kind of, go to the start case, which is the first case. We're still here, the start phase, and then let's just go in here and we type something like app sign. Remember where this app sign is coming from, and I will talk about all of this eventually. App sign dot text equal to, right? We can now open and close brackets. Remember when we used our control command space to call up command space to call up the emojis, right? In this case, we want to use a robot. So essentially we are saying, on the app sign, this is the text we want. Once we start, this screen has to show up to show that some kind of robots, we're playing against some kind of robots. So the next thing we want to do is also, when the game starts, right, we also want to hide the play button. So how we do that is to include a line of code that says play again button. Remember, and I'm going to show us, all of these are buttons that we created in the user interface, the labels for those buttons. So you might want to go back to go look at it. So hidden, we want to hide it, is hidden. We can choose this. So we say it's hidden, and then we attribute it to true because it's hidden. All right, that's how we hide it. And the last line of code will be us trying to enable and show all the players, all the player signs. So we want to show whether it's when the players play, whether it's a rock, paper, or all of those signs, right, would show up on the screen. So how do we do that, right? Because remember, we have the rock button, we have the paper button, we have the scissors button, and we want to be able to hide it and at the same time enable it, right? So we want to enable and then show it. Rather, we want to enable and show those signs. And remember, all of this is happening within the context of the start. That's what happens once you start. So we're listing all the things that will happen when you start. So rock button, right, dot is hidden. is hidden is a property that tries to say, hey, it's hidden, but then we're saying false. In other words, it's not hidden. So we now have paper button. And remember, this paper button, you can go back to your main, which is the view part of this, which is part 4, and you will see how we labeled each of those buttons, different things, and those are the buttons that we are using. This properties is hidden to hide or unhide, essentially. So in this case, we're saying it's not hidden because we are assigning false to it. Is hidden equals to false, and then we also have the rock, we have the paper, and then we should also have the scissors. Scissors button is hidden false. And then to enable each of the buttons, let's go, we say rock button dot, you use the property is enabled. So that's how you enable or disable. So, but in this case, we said it's true. And then the next one, we use paper button is enabled. Another property, same property, enabled equals to true. And then we have scissors button is enabled, which is equals to true. Yeah, so those are all of the things. If you look at all of this, those are all the things we want to happen. Must be consistent with white space. Okay, these are all the things we want to happen once we start. We're in the start state of the application. So that's where we are with that. So the next thing is, before we proceed to do anything around, we focused on stats. Before we proceed to do anything with win, lose, and draw, one of the things we want to do is, there are two places where the UI, which is the UI, rather update UI, need to be called within the code, right? There are two places, and I want to point out those two places. And for each time we're going to call the update UI, we're actually going to use stats as an argument. The first place will be in the view.load. We can go ahead. Let me see. Oh, so watch this. This function was not supposed to be inside the view.load. So I'm cut, command X, and I'm putting it out. It's outside view.load. So command V. Notice if I highlight this, you can see view.load opens and closes here. This is a completely different function standing all by its own. So take note of that. So next thing I want to do here is I want to go into view.load, and that's one place I actually want to call this method. Sorry. Command copy, and then I want to call so I'm calling that will be the first place, right? Because the idea of calling it from there is, when the app first loads, we want to update the UI with the stats. So the first time the app kind of loads. So we come in inside here, and I want to use a particular parameter, and then we map it to the game to the game state. But at this point, we are choosing the particular part of the game state will be the start, right? So all I'm saying is when the game, once it loads, because the loading starts here, I want it to go call the parts, right? Within this is what I'm calling within the game state. I'm calling this state within the game state. That's why we're using art here. So that's what I'm doing. That's the first place we are going to make our call to. The second place we are going to make this call to, right, would be in the let me see, when a player, so let's come to this place. So play again. Remember, we created some kind of button where you can go play when you want to restart the game, and that's the function, the action IB function, IB action function. So the idea is I want to be able to do the same thing here, that whenever the app starts, which is the overall view DID load, once the app loads, I want it to call this function. And then the other time I want it to call this function is when I go tap the play again, the button, right? And you need to pay attention. Let me go back here and show you what I'm talking about. Remember, this is the play again button, right? So whenever you tap it, all this is saying is I need you to call this. In other words, it's going to load this part of the app, which is the .start, essentially. So that's what we are doing there. The next thing we want to do is, when notice, and I'm going to move this a little bit. Notice there are 3 functions, right? And these are essentially your action, and all of these 1, 2, 3 are connected to different components on the objects in front of this, right? Let me go up. So these are 1, 2, 3. These are 3 of them, right? So I'm going back here. So the point is, when I tap either of them, what happens, right? That's what the next play is. So essentially you have all of this, and when you tap them, we want to start by creating some kind of method that we're going to call play, and then we are going to include some executable comments in play, and then we are going to have each of these call play, so that whenever you tap any of those signs that I just showed us right now, it will call play. So how do we do that? We have to start by creating a function that is called play, right? And then we are going to use sign as a parameter. Remember, each of those things are signs, and we're going to use them as a parameter. So this is where I'm going to create my this opens and closes here. So I'm going to create a function that is called play, right? And I'm going to open sign, and I'm giving a parameter of the type sign, right? Remember, this is sign. This is sign here, right? So we're giving it of this type, and it can call any of this. So let me go back. Sign. So I'm going to open, and I'm going to close. So we've created that. After creating that, the next thing we want to do is um, we would want to load up. Okay, so before we even put anything right in that function, let's call it first. Make sure we are calling it in each of these places so that we don't forget to do that. So, and I'm gonna say pick this, command copy, and then let's come here, command V. Now notice, what sign am I looking to call here, right? Remember there are three signs, right? What sign am I looking to call here? In the first case, I'm trying to call rock, so I'll say dot rock, which is a type of sign, one of several signs, and I can copy this to command copy, and I come in here and oh no, I have to put it inside, command, and then here will be paper. Instead of rock, I would have paper. And then the third is I would have scissors, command V, and that will be scissors. Right, so right now, once I tap this, a call is going to be made to this function, but notice that the function is still bare. There's nothing in there. So the next steps, the next things I'm going to do is to be able to create executable statements within play, so that whenever someone goes to the user interface and clicks the rock or the paper or the scissors, right, each of them, which IB action is the executable part, is what do you call it, is the part of the user interface, right, that's responsible for, is the mechanism for adding functionality to the object, right? So once it's clicked, it will call whatever executable comments you have within this function. So we're going to start with that to fill up the place. So one of the first things we want to do is to get a randomly generated sign. Remember, the computer is going to be playing against some human. So we need to figure out a way, to randomly, remember when you come to the logic here, we've created this function, right, where you can go back to the last video and watch it, part 4, where we discuss this logic. We need to be able to pull that logic into this place right now, right, of how you can randomly get a randomly selected sign, right, to represent the app's choice of sign that it chooses each time it comes into its own turn. So how we do that is to create a constant that we'll call app choice to represent the app's choice of sign, and then map it to a function we created area, which is more or less called the random sign, what I just showed us not too long ago. So I'm going to start with app choice. So this is a constant we're just creating now, and we are going to map it to random sign. Again, look at where random sign is coming from. Sorry, from sign, random sign. You can go to part 4 to understand what's going on here. So that's where we are mapping it to, right? And then open and can't find app choice within scope. Yeah, we are coming for that. We're coming. So that's what we do. Then the next thing we want to do is, let me see. The next thing we want to do is to figure out the game state from the two signs. Now, the player would have clicked a sign, choosing a sign, and through this line of code, we have generated, so sorry, this will be let, because we are just creating it. That's why we have that error coming up. Yeah. So From this line, we would have been able to determine what the choice of the computer is. So the next thing we want to do is to figure out a game state. Now, because at this point we have the sign that is coming from the computer, and we also have the sign of the human when they punch. Based on those two signs, we need to be able to, next thing we want to do is we need to be able to now figure out the state, right? Because it's a combination of those two that would give us the state. And this is the logic for that, where you have the player and then the opposite. And when you compare the player's sign and the opponent's sign, which is the computer's sign, then you can determine a particular state, right? So that's what we are trying to do. We're just essentially doing that. And to do that, we'll simply say, let the game state, right, equals to sign dot get game state, and then opponent sign, and then we choose the app choice, right? So that's how we get that, right? So essentially what we are doing here is we'll create the constant, which is the game state, and then call the game state constant, get game state constant that we created earlier and I showed us, and then pass in the app choice constant into the game state constant, right? And that's how we arrive at that. So the next thing we want to do is to call the update method to pass in the game state return from the game states in the line of code that we have here. Remember the updates UI method, which is this. Where is it? The update UI. So we want to be able to call it. That's what we want to do right now. And why are we calling it? We want it to pass the game state, which we have determined from this line. You remember we determined a game state from this line. We want it to pass in that game state, and update, because once you get the new game state, you have to update, and then it will now show you a different thing. The screen has to change. Something has to change because, and also let's go ahead and make that call. Update UI. So we've made the update and the state, and we're going to say game state, right? Because we are going to pull in whatever state we determine here, and that's what it takes in or consumes. So once we are done with that, the next thing we want to do is make the app choice sign appear in the app label when the buttons are tapped, right? So we will do that by just clicking app sign dot text equals to app choice dot emoji, right? And that's where we stop with that. And then we are almost there. I think we probably stop here. I'll continue the video so that it doesn't get too long. Once we stop here, I'll just continue the video I'll continue the tutorial in one more video. All right, and hopefully when I'm done with that, I'll try to go back, maybe see if I can figure out one more video to go back and explain everything again, what's happening and how things are connected to everything. All right, thank you for listening so far. I hope you've been able to pick up some things here. Any questions, please email me or drop something in the comment section.